All right, everybody, welcome to August office hours. Thank you so much for joining. This month, we are going to be talking about cloud networking, observability, and resilience. We do have a guest speaker on. His name is Josh Cridlebaugh. He is the Director of Solutions Marketing here at Aviatrix. So welcome, Josh. And for those of you that have not joined in office hours in the past, this is a program that we created earlier this year, really to bring our community together. So every month, the topic will vary, as you may or may not have already seen. And they kind of shift between industry topics like this one and more professional or career-related topics like we have next month, where we'll talk about the cloud skills gap with the CEO of Go Cloud Careers, Mike Gibbs. So that is kind of the intro about office hours, and some quick ground rules here. One of my favorite things about the program really is that there are no rules. So you can feel free to take yourself off mute at any time. Clearly, this is just a regular Zoom meeting, so everybody has the ability to do so. And you can also ask questions in the chat at any time. So Shahzad Ali is my co-host. He will be kind of leading the conversation with Josh, and we'll both be monitoring the chat. So feel free at any time if you have any questions along the way. So with that, I will hand it over to Shahzad.
All right.
And we'll get started. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you and welcome. My name is Shahzad Ali, and I'm truly delighted to be your co-host for today's session. I have experience in IT industry spanning more than 20 plus years. And, the passion basically is to solve business challenges with cutting edge technologies. And that's the reason I'm very excited to guide you through what promises to be an insightful and engaging discussion with Josh. Yeah, we'll make sure that this session is valuable for every attendee. So we'll discuss topics which is, that are going to be technical, but we can actually go sideways. We don't have to stick to the topics that we have here. If you have any burning question about your network, about your cloud network, things are not working, please do bring these up here, right? So here we are trying to cover two important topics, and I know that time is very short for them. But basically, what's happening in the industry is that people are deploying their cloud network. They have their critical workload already moved into the cloud. But sometimes I hear this like, "Hey, what's going on in my cloud network? I don't know what's out there, right? I'm sort of blindfolded when it comes to seeing things deeply or monitor things the way I wanted to monitor, right?" That's challenge number one. And the second challenge is basically, I have seen these new cybersecurity issues, CSP going down. I don't want to be in the news. So how can you actually help me provide this resiliency for my network, right? What is your answer, right? So that's what we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to open up with the opening question. And like Katie said, this is very open forum, open discussion. Feel free to go off mute, on camera, ask question. So Josh, I think what I'm going to ask you is actually related to your experience, right? So in your experience, what are the most common blind spots in cloud network monitoring that's basically leave organization feel blindfolded?
No, it's a great question, Shahzad. So I guess maybe let me first touch on the experiences that I've had. So I have marketing in my title now, so people usually instantly disregard everything I say, which is the exact same thing that I did for the last 12 years, because as the last 12 years, I spent my time as a network engineer. That was my role. I worked for a few different organizations. Getty Images. My claim to fame was working at Wizards of the Coast and helping build their cloud network. And so if you've ever spent money with Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons, I feel partially responsible for that spend, but I won't help monetarily compensate you. But so with my background in networking, I got a lot of opportunity to help, like Shahzad, you mentioned, is identify these business use cases and these problems. And so 2.5 years ago now, I joined Aviatrix in the product management organization, where the whole goal was to how do we simplify cloud observability? How do we simplify resiliency for these cloud networks? And we really kind of narrowed down some of the things that we should be watching for in the cloud. And funny enough, you would think, was it, your BGP statuses or up down times or even latency. What we found over and over is that the gotchas in cloud weren't native networking constructs. It was cloud native limitations that they've artificially placed on the way that they do networking to try and move your meter forward to capture revenue on their side. So one of the things that we see in the cloud, there's really two metrics that I always recommend people watch when they're in the cloud. The first one is looking for bandwidth limit exceeded. Now, this is a term that is older. So if you you can actually see these on your Cisco switches, or if you do like a show and interface on a Juniper or Cisco, you'll see this as well. But what's interesting inside of someone like AWS or Azure, they will actually place a hard limit on the amount of bandwidth that an interface is able to do. So think of, traditionally it's like my limit for my interface was the capacity of the NIC itself. I mean, it's a 1 gig NIC, it's a 10 gig NIC. I can send bandwidth to that. Well, in the cloud, you actually will start seeing that bandwidth be filled, and you'll start seeing these drops before you're using the full capacity of the NIC that you have, depending on the types of flows that you're sending through traffic or through the interface itself. And the other one that we always recommend people watch is, especially in Amazon, and they don't publicly document this anywhere, which can get really frustrating. There are some Stackflow, like overstack sites that people have started tracking it better, but is the connection limits. So the interfaces inside Amazon, dependent on the interface size and the instance that you're using, they actually will limit the number of connections that a single interface can make. And once again, the whole purpose of that is to push customers to use larger instance sizes, because larger instance sizes mean more revenue. So on their part, it's the right move. They want to make sure that you're getting the right bandwidth, that you have enough CPU and memory to handle the amount of traffic that you're pushing. But there are very important things for us as network operators to make sure that we're aware of, because a T3 small instance may not be enough depending on the way that your application is actually sending traffic. So that's why actually one of the things, Shazad, I'll put a plug in for Aviatrix. Why I love Aviatrix so much is that we easily expose those types of metrics. But you can also get those metrics in CloudWatch in the CSP native themselves.
Yeah, but there is a cost associated with that also, right?
Yeah, so
cost of the monitoring.
that is a big piece. I mean, I remember so especially when it was like, this makes me feel a little bit old. It was 8 years ago. The cloud was, or 10 years ago, and the cloud was really just starting to get big, right? And Amazon had signed some weird S3 style contracts with Netflix because Netflix needed more space in their data centers. And I was working at the time as a network engineer for Getty Images, and we're reading about all these changes that are happening to cloud, and like this introduction of cloud and how it's going to impact businesses. And we're starting to think like, oh, we should build this ourselves. Like, we don't need their infrastructure. We have so much infrastructure. Why not just build it ourselves? And what we found is, as we were building it, there was two pieces to it. Like, one, the cost to be able to build it was monumental, right? So like, we're like, we can't build it ourselves. But so we move into cloud and we're operating, and guess what came back was, the way you guys are building in cloud now is way too expensive. You're spending more money than if we would have just built this ourselves. And so what ended up happening is, there's lots of I call them, penny, nickel, and dime charges in the cloud, especially for networking, because you look at things like cross AZ charges or egress charges, and like all of these smaller charges. There's shared infrastructure charges that are put in there as well. And the first person usually that gets impacted in that is the teams come in and say, hey, why are you getting logs from these 10 locations? And so, do you actually need full visibility into these 10 locations? Because we can save X amount if we were to just rip 3 of those out. And so you end up having to sacrifice the ability to troubleshoot your entire network for staying on budget. Right. So It really is. It's, you see this over and over in organizations. They go all in on cloud, and then they step back in a year or two and they go, oh, wait a minute, now we're spending way too much. And the first thing that usually goes is the nice to have troubleshooting tools, because the network guys will eventually figure it out without them. But it's going to take an extra week to do it.
No, that's why I think it's very important to don't cut the corner, follow the architecture approach. And there is a reason for the CSP marketplace, because obviously CSPs cannot solve each and every problem out there, right? That's the reason they created the marketplace for companies like Aviatrix to solve these business problems, solve the cost issue that is being, very widespread actually in the industry, right? So I think this is one of the things that we do at Aviatrix is, we don't charge for the cost of monitoring. It's
Right.
basically part and parcel of the product. So these are great point you mentioned. Any questions? Go ahead, John.
I'd love to hear if there's any thoughts or comments from everyone on it. I know that people are throwing in where they're from, what in the chat, which is awesome to see that, where everybody is.
Yep, and I'm actually from California, so good to see you all joining from different places. Yeah, so any question from the audience?
Yes, hello, hi to all of you, greeting to all of you. I want to ask related for resilience, for cloud and general. Sometimes there will be outages in maybe in the cloud itself or the regions, but through a human mistake or something. We do something like it need to evaluate when you put a new things to the cloud that is not suitable to running. Maybe it come do some wrong mistake and affect to other regions. Those things how to be evaluate and how to evaluate and how to look about it and search it.
Yeah,
Meaning
no,
look the affection those things.
It's a very good question. So the way that I've always heard that referred to and throughout my career is they call it the ripple effect, right? So inside the cloud, it's like one change is made in one region, and especially on like the provider side, there's been some very famous instances where a small change in one region that wasn't supposed to impact anybody ripples out into the greater world. And impacts several areas. And I think the biggest thing for me if it's human error, it's being able to have one proper change management. Like that's extremely important, but also being able to track changes. So one of the features that Aviatrix has that I haven't actually seen anywhere else in this, especially in the networking space, is we actually have a topology replay option inside of our product. Now, I'm not trying to do product pitches, but that level of detail is why an overlay becomes so important, because you're watching every aspect of it and you're able to say, in region A, there was this issue first, and then you can watch it grow out into the greater organization. So definitely like having tools dedicated to that is extremely important and super valuable. The other piece that I would always recommend is building baselines for your observability. That's where tools like Grafana and Datadog and New Relic become so important in the observability space, because if you can baseline your application and know more or less what it should look like over a 30, 60, 90 day, you can watch for these hiccups, especially in, say, network traffic or interface traffic, looking at memory, CPU, looking at bandwidth, looking at drop rates, looking at like all those, the base core things. If you can build that baseline out, that will allow you to be able to start to recognize, hey, something is different. Let's go and investigate this particular area because it was different first. And that's where, we could potentially make a small shift into thinking about how AI is going to impact the network. Because right now, when we look at those baselines, we're doing it usually from a human perspective. We set thresholds on the traffic. We set thresholds on what we consider to be normal. but being able to, hopefully in the future, in most networking tools, being able to leverage some kind of machine learning or large language model that builds that normal for us and can help detect deviation sooner. That's where I get excited for the networking space.
No, interesting. No, so I will add some couple of points here is that, the majority of the cyber attacks, if you read the news and if you read the research papers, they basically came from the human errors, right? Majority of them.
Yeah.
And there are guardrails that you should have in place, obviously, through Terraform, through automation, through proper approval mechanisms. But also you need to now think about relying on multiple CSPs, because what Josh mentioned is true, right? There is a ripple effect of if one service goes down. I remember 2 years ago, there was an AWS service called Kinesis, I believe. And actually it caused the ripple effect, which actually brought down the API. Can you believe it? The API, the AWS API. And it was very difficult for our customers to basically, provide that level of resiliency. Fortunately, the customers who were present in multiple clouds, they had a backup option. So they actually, had their services up and running. But yeah, this is how you need to think about. And Josh, since you already mentioned about all these points, I'm going to take this conversation more towards the resiliency now, because I see there is a disconnect from the C-level and from the people who are actually hands-on practitioner, right? So what do you think, how IT team can effectively communicate the importance of cloud network, multi-cloud network, and providing the resiliency to C-level execs?
Yeah. So I can speak Spanish. And one of the things that I learned while speaking Spanish is that it is very, very difficult to learn a new language. Which, surprise, learning is hard. But the biggest piece that helped me when I was learning that language was to take phrases that I knew were important and always have those translated and ready to go. And the reality here is we should be doing the exact same thing with our tech speak that we to the business jargon. I was talking to a friend the other day who his company is what they do is they basically run it's a small vision company based out here in the Pacific Northwest, and he's growing his business. And the way that he grows his business isn't by opening new stores, it's by finding smaller stores than himself, going to them, pitching his vision, and then merging them into his now larger brand. And every time he does that, it grows his brand out. And so I asked him, I was like, what does that do to your IT team? Because that's where I'm interested, right? Like, that's what it's like. It's like when you guys bring in a new business and he goes, oh, they have no idea that we're even doing this. He's like, what happens is they just show up and they put a full new network stack in. And so, I think about that is like, how do we properly communicate this business as the folks laying the piping? I think the famous analogy for networking is like, we are the pipes that run water through your home. Is to understand, is this pipe going to be for the kitchen sink? Is this going to be for a toilet? Is this going to be for a shower? Like, where is this actually going to go? And who's going to be using it? How is it going to function? And so if we can understand that, and we can say, hey, the technology that I'm putting in here, if I automate this, or if I spend the extra 3 or 4 days to build this by code, the next time that our business does a merger and acquisition, I can push a button, and now instead of your merger taking 3 weeks to get done, it takes 3 days. And we can simplify and integrate these other companies. That's where we'll see more and more technical people being brought in earlier into the conversation. So then, the other big thing, right, is when does IT find out that something big is happening? When it happened yesterday. So it's if we can prove the value of what we're doing and speak the language that we're speaking, have that translation, it's like, ¿Dónde está el baño? It's like, where's the bathroom? That is, being able to have that translation on hand and ready for them is very important.
Cool. So I see you go off mute. Do you have any comments or question, Dad?
Is that Mr. Wokey? How are you, sir?
Dad, are you out there? Okay, no worries. Yeah, so basically, let me bring my experience into the picture, because what I have seen that, the communication requires hitting the pain point, right? So if you don't hit the right pain point in front of your C-level exec, it will be very difficult for you to get the budget. So if you tie your business initiatives or your networking, projects to the application availability, I think in my experience, that actually works really, really the best, because now you can talk about the business impact, the revenue loss due to the application going down in one cloud or in one region. So that is what my experience is. I would love to hear from others if they have any other, points for our audience to remember or share. If not, then we can actually move on to the next question I have. And again, this is, I'm going to shift a little bit back to our, monitoring topic, right? So, obviously CSPs have provided the tooling for monitoring and observability. Obviously that's needed, but how can an organization effectively balance the native monitoring tool provided by CSP with third-party solutions like what we provide through Aviatrix? What's your perspective on it?
Oh man, this is where, so I've operated cloud networks without this and with this, and I'll tell you, I will never go back to not having a multi-cloud solution for visibility, operations, and control, especially multi-cloud, but even single cloud. And honestly, I'm gonna go tiny bit off script here. We're gonna go. I'm gonna just share my desktop for a sec, or share my screen for just a second, because the power of imagery and the simplification of networking is so critical to be able to really visualize the need for something that can look holistically at multi-cloud and be able to give you a view into how your network is operating, where it's healthy, where it isn't healthy. Because at the end of the day, the cloud wasn't originally built with network engineers in mind. It was built to simplify the workload access, to allow application developers to deploy an application as quickly as possible to start generating revenue, which is great. We want to generate revenue. And now as the cloud has been adopted more, we get into these environments where there's hundreds and thousands of applications in the cloud, and they need to be able to talk to each other, and they need to have secure and resilient and scalable connections. And how do we do that in the cloud? And the clouds have done some really great stuff in the last couple of years to try and step into that, but it's still not enough. There's still things that are missing in the cloud native build outs to be, especially multi-cloud, because everyone knows that Amazon and Microsoft, they're not likely ever going to play very well together. They can't even use the same naming structures. But just being able to, in this case here, I have a very basic deployment from a business perspective, but from a networking perspective, it can get very complex very quickly. And now, instead of me having to become an expert in GCP and in Azure and in OCI and all these other regions and these other clouds, I can focus on the business outcome and learn one tool and say, now I can provide connectivity from my on-prem location to my remote location in Sao Paulo through a couple of clicks through a third-party solution that focuses on making the network easier for me. So that's the big thing for me, Shahzad, when I think about it. It's like the need for something that overlays it, that focuses. You don't use a screwdriver to use a tool that you would use a wrench for. And networking is the exact same way. I would, we need to have the right tools for the jobs that we're doing. Let's use the tools that were built for networking. Let's use the tools that were built for applications. And if we can build those together and have that cohesive view into how they operate and get the observability and the resilience out of it, then there's really no better opportunity for success for our network engineers than having that tool available.
I see. So you mentioned about the tool. I think it's a very good segue for my next question, unless someone from the audience has a question. Let's go to the audience and see if we have any, either via chat or through audio. All right, guys, if not, then, the tooling, obviously, like you mentioned, is very important. But what about the framework, right? Because if you look at the industry, pretty much for everything, we have a framework where, NIST is there for zero trust network architecture, for example, and other frameworks, right? So in your opinion, first, is there a framework like that for, network engineer to provide the resiliency or observability? Question number one. And the second part is that if not, what can an enterprise adopt to build a resilient cloud network, and how this framework could enhance, application resiliency as well?
No, it's a great question. So each of the clouds have their own version of a well-architected framework, right? Like there's a way to go into Azure and say, okay, what are your best practices? And it's important to be very aware of those, because building in the way that the CSP has recommended is most likely going to help you build in the most cost-effective and redundant way possible. The big problem that you run into is, doubling back to what I had said before, that's the way that the well-architected architectures in Amazon and Azure recommend. It's focused on the application itself. How do I best build for a redundant and scalable application? And where that's great, and we need to focus on that, and that is the core of how our businesses are generating revenue. It doesn't last long if the network doesn't also have a well-architected framework underneath it. We're building these applications without, and a lot of times, thinking about how does the movement of my application impact the network, and how does it need to connect from point A to point B? How does it need to get back to my data center? And that's where I would highly recommend people to look at the Aviatrix well-architected networking information, because like the CSPs, we've recognized that we need that well-formed architecture. And so for Aviatrix, that's one of the things that we've done for our customers, is we've looked at the CSPs and we've said, hey, that's a great way to build an application. We agree. That's exactly how you should do it. Now let's layer in the best way to build the network underneath it.
Yep. No, that's a great point. And I know a lot of customers have adopted our framework, our design philosophy, the MCNA architecture,
Right.
and then the design pillar that we actually presented to the industry, basically, right? And I
Right.
know you also talk to a lot of customers, and you have deep expertise as customer yourself, but as a solution director and product manager in the past, I'm pretty sure you would have seen real world scenarios where these frameworks would have increased the resiliency or observability, right? So can you give me an example of a customer you work with? You don't need to name the customer, but where this framework, the MCNA architecture, prevented a potential outage or a security breach or something that big that we actually stopped for.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I mean, there's two that come top of mind. So one of them was when I was a customer. So this is 6 years ago. And what happened is a very common issue in the cloud for breaches is someone will open up an S3 or an Azure Blob bucket, and they'll forget that they're just directly connected to the internet. And right, like, and especially in Azure, which something for everyone to think about. In Azure, the automatic direct connected VMs, that goes away in September of next year. So if you guys have environments with VMs that are just automatically using the default access, reach out to us, because we'll help with the strategy of how to migrate all new VMs to a NAT solution, which is something that's going to happen in September of next year in Azure. So that's a really important one to be aware of. But in this case, we were just using NAT gateways. NAT gateway has no visibility, it has no security, and it's just a direct connection out to the internet. And if you open an S3 bucket behind a NAT gateway, it is very easy for someone to find that particular S3 bucket and get in and take data that they shouldn't have. So we actually, the company that I was working for, we had somebody leave an S3 bucket open. Luckily, there was no PII or personal data in it. But we got an email, and it was like a broadcast DL all to the company saying, we have this data set. You need to lock it down. If you don't lock it down in 12 hours, we're going to go public with it. And right. And so at least they weren't trying to extort money from us. It was just like, do it now or be announced. And I think about that, and that's where it is very difficult to have with native networking, to have a distributed, controlled, secure output to the internet. That's where the reality is third-party solutions are almost the only way to be able to do that. Yeah, and Amazon's made some really great strides forwards with Amazon Firewall, and Azure's done the same. But don't go look at the efficacy test that just happened with AWS for their firewall. But with something like Aviatrix, we actually can give you visibility and control and security on those gateways, and we do it all via IAC, right? Like, we can fit right into the developer CI/CD pipeline. We can simplify that connectivity. So for me, like, that's number one. Like, we should never just have, I mean, that's been a rule my entire career. You never just directly connect to the internet. But in the cloud, it's normal. It happens all the time. The other one is, with routing being such a kind of an afterthought in the cloud, when we look at what happens when I spin up a new region and I connect it to, say, TGW, and I get a new quad 0 injected into my routes. We need some kind of process to be able to approve them. So this is one that we were talking to a customer the other day, and where Aviatrix actually saved their bacon, because they had spun up a new region. They'd connected their existing Cloud WAN instance to an Aviatrix transitive gateway. And our gateways by default will do what's called route approval. And so what happened is they got a notification saying, hey, do you want to approve quad 0 default route being sent to this? And he was like, I panicked. He's like, he's like, do I want to approve? He's like, no, do not approve that, because you're going to bring down my whole network, because now everything's going to route through this new region that we haven't set up yet. And those are the kinds of things that make it so that when we're building our network, like, having that extra visibility and the control over is like, do you want to do this? Yes, like, you need that. So those are two that just come top of mind. There's so many horror stories. I mean, I could tell you about a time that I routed everything out of Munich, Germany, for a company based in the US. And like, there's so many things that we can stop if we have that proper visibility, the change process in place.
Yeah, so no, I don't want to hear those horror stories. Halloween is just around the corner. We can wait for the Halloween, and then we will get to that point. But actually, we are going towards the end of this topic or this session here. So I have, last question saved, which is obviously the hot burning topic in the industry.
Before you do that, Shazad, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
It looks like Mohammed threw something in the chat for us.
There is a question in the
Good.
chat.
Go ahead. Sorry, I missed that.
No. So Mohammed, it's a great question. So the question is, how do we extend Copilot using integrations and webhooks, and what use cases can it help with? So it's a very, very good question. So Copilot has the ability to build webhooks, and webhooks allow you to, think of that as now the fishing line. You can take a fishing line and throw that into any lake, any river, any ocean that you want. And so as long as, there is water there, or the ability to accept the webhook, you can send your alerts from Copilot into any pre-built existing system. And the reality is almost every IT department has some kind of Ops Genie or alerting system in place already built. And so by using the webhook integrations with Copilot, now you can seamlessly fit your cloud networking alerts and, your L1, L2 notification systems right into your existing frameworks. So now I can treat that new segment of cloud that I'm building, or the cloud that I'm starting to help modernize. I can fit that into all of my existing workflows, all of my existing structures, and hopefully not change too much of the day-to-day of your L1, L2. So it's a great question. We should always be thinking of, how can I leverage the technology to work into my existing tech stacks?
Hey, Josh, it's Dave. Got a question
Hey,
on your webhooks.
Yeah.
We worked extensively with you in webhooks and Copilot to get into our NMS system. But one of the biggest issues that we have is Copilot requires a third-party signed cert.
Yes.
It does not trust internal certs, so that's an added expense. I mean, if you come down to it, that we got to do just to do a webhook. When are you guys going to allow support for internally signed certs?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I would have to, so I recently stepped out, as about 6 months ago, I stepped out of the role as product manager for Copilot. I can definitely raise that question, Dave, with Chris and get someone to get back to you on an answer. But I don't know off the top of my head. I know that's something that we'd always talked about, is like making it so that we can trust internal CAs for that. It's absolutely a great thought process. That's what we should have probably done from the beginning. But that is something that we can make a note. Katie, let's make sure we get that to Chris. But that's a very good call out.
Because, yeah, if you don't have an externally signed search, your webhooks will never work.
Yeah. Yeah.
For example, I'm using tools like Avizo or Splunk. Will be good with using with the Copilot, meaning like backups or as a relationship between these two. Maybe will be connection interaction between them for protection or for alert notification or resilience for whole network. It can be
So that's a good question.
as an example.
Yeah. So Mohammed, what I would say there is webhooks are much more about the actual physical triggering of an alert, of an existing alert. Now, you could send that data to a Splunk. I'm not sure if you could send it to Wiz, but what you can do in the Splunk instance is where they're going to be the most successful is by the ingest of syslog data. So that's really where they do a lot of their alerting and a lot of their visibility. So there are ways inside the Aviatrix Copilot to forward syslog to Splunk. There's also some very good integrations that you can do externally to Copilot that allow you to build up a log forwarder that will help you get that data into Splunks or into Wiz or wherever you want to do your data analysis. So I would say from a webhook perspective, I would think of that as something has triggered and I'm sending a notification of that triggering, versus with the best way to operate with somebody like a Splunk would be I've sent you logs and then you've done a log analysis on it. And likely you already have some alerts built inside of Splunk that are then sending off to an Ops Genie or something like that. So, just making sure like there are ways to do the integration between the two tool sets. In the case of Splunk and Wiz, I would not recommend using webhooks to get the data to them, because that's the purpose for a webhook is to say something has triggered inside the product and you need to look at it now.
Yeah, so I see two models, right? The push model from
Yes.
Copilot to other resources, and there is a pull model with the network API that we released recently, right? So that could be another avenue to explore for customers, right, Josh?
Yeah, no, I think that's the Network Insights API would be another way. And that would be a good one to send to Splunk or to New Relic or Datadog. Anyone that can integrate with Prometheus can integrate with the API that was built.
Perfect. Perfect. Cool. Any other questions?
For example, if I want to do a centralized
Ahmad, you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
things.
No, you were cutting out there, Mohammed. Apologize.
Yeah, sorry. I will write it. I will write it down as a
Okay,
question.
awesome.
All right. So yeah, so this is like I said, going to be the burning question of the day for this session, at least, is the topic of Gen AI, right? Everyone is worried about it. People are now deploying their own set of LLMs, sometime in the private LLM type situation, right? So there is an issue with the security. There is an issue with actually sending this huge amount of data from one place to another place, like from on-premise into the cloud, right? So how do you see this shaping the future of cloud networking plus security and plus resiliency and monitoring? Obviously, you need to look into the data, what's shipping between these two systems.
Yeah, no, I always chuckle when we get into the AI conversations. There's a famous post that was made that was like, it's like, I don't want AI to do my job. I want AI to do my laundry and do my dishes. And in networking, there are some very, very good use cases for AI. And I think there's two ways to look at this. There's AI for networking, which is where you allow AI to assist in the building and control and the monitoring of the network itself. But importantly, there's the adverse to that. There's also networking for AI. And how do we identify workloads that are now somewhat different, where we've dealt with machine learning and passing of large data, but some of the protocols inside the AI and the LLMs are different than what we've dealt with in the past. And so I think there's the two tacks for it. One, I am a firm believer that over the next 3-4 years, every product will see some version of an AI assistant that helps analyze and build their network for them. I think that will happen in every aspect of the technology. And in some cases, it may be something as simple as having live doc help inside the product. But I think the first piece that the industry is going to need, and this is every industry is going to need a part of this, is how do we do networking right for the AI workloads? And so that's the ability to recognize all the desperate workloads wherever they are throughout the industry, being able to securely pass the data, because the data going to LLMs generally is very proprietary, being able to scale to meet the needs for it, and being able to be automated so that I can spin that up and spin it down when I know that I need to send those workloads through.
Awesome. No, thanks a lot. Thanks, Josh, for all the insightful discussion. Really good practitioner level knowledge here. No fluff. I love this. One of my best sessions so far. So thanks a lot, guys, for attending this call. And over to you, Katie.
Yes, thank you, everybody who joined. And I did drop a survey link in the chat. It would be awesome if you guys could just give us your feedback. It'll only take you about 2 minutes. And you also have an opportunity to request future topics for future office hours. So with that, I hope that we will see you the last Friday of September. I think it's the 27th of September. We will talk about the cloud skills gap, like I mentioned at the start of this call, with the CEO of Go Cloud Careers, Mike Gibbs. So with that, hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and thanks so much for joining.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. See you. It was nice to meet you all. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.